companies today, they look at Canada as more of a gateway into the United States. Now, it's much more difficult to set up shop in the US, getting a visa or what have you. But Canada, they welcome any foreign company who's prepared to put money into our economy. So a lot of foreign multinationals, what they do is set up a sort of fiduciary company here in Canada. But really, their ultimate goal is to market their products into the US. So again, when I talk about determining what your final cost and shipping the product, really, if half or 60% of your sales are going to the United States, a lot of times what you may want to consider is simply bringing every other month a container into a free zone, something like Buffalo, where there are bonded warehouses. When you bring products into these type of free zone areas, you don't pay the tax and duty until you finally clear it. So if it's destined to the United States, it goes straight into the US and then you pay your duty. But it's no point bringing it to Canada only to claim back the tax because you're shipping into the United States or what have you there. So really, you got to keep tabs on what your final cost, and that will, at the end, determine if it's a product worth getting involved with there. I made reference earlier, understanding pricing structures. Again, I said 80% of your sales might represent 2 or 3 major customers who keep buying this product from you day in and day out. Now, up until now, you've been buying from a local wholesaler. But knowing you're selling this every day and it represents 2/3 of your sales, why not look at sourcing the product directly and importing it yourself and cutting out one more layer? So this is a typical distribution of a product, say, coming from overseas. Now, again, some industries may have 2 or 3 layers. Some might have 1 when I talk about direct marketing a little bit later on. But this is the typical distribution from manufacturer to retailer or to final consumer. So I'm assuming we're dealing with a foreign manufacturer in this example here, let's say from England. And a manufacturer, again, their primary market is their local market. So any sales outside of Canada, outside of the UK, might be a bonus to their volume there. Understand, they're not going to just drop everything just because you give them a purchase order for 2 containers of product there, because their primary market that they have to service on a day-to-day basis is within their own local market there. So again, keeping that in mind, you have much more to negotiate. You're going to probably get a better price than what a wholesaler locally will get because you're buying in a larger volume. But typically, the pricing from a manufacturer to a committed importer who's going to buy, say, a container load of product here every other month, the markup is probably anywhere from 5 to 15% above the manufacturer's cost. So he doesn't need to make 50 or 100% profit at this level if he's selling to an exporter. Because you're buying a container. In one container, if you're selling, I don't know, say tuna, there might be 20,000 cases of tuna in this one 20-foot container. If he's making 10% of 20,000 cases, that's good for him every 2 months if you're booking an order with him there. From the importer, let's say you're the importer. Your job here is to identify wholesalers / distributors, depending on the industry or the product that you represent. We sort of use that term intertwined there. But from the importer to the wholesaler, now, if the importer had to buy a container load, typically a wholesaler, or who would be classified a wholesaler, would have commit to you probably a skid load, or what we call a pallet of product. So if there are 20,000 tins of tuna in this container, there's probably about, I don't know, about 700 or 800 tins on one pallet. And that would be the kind of commitment that you would need from a wholesaler if they're going to be a distributor of your product or what have you there. If your markup from the manufacturer was 5 to 15%, the markup from you to the wholesaler is probably between 15 and 30%. You don't need to make 100% because he's still buying 700 cases from you. And so the markup, again, is between 15 to 30%. Same markup applies to what we refer to as a jobber. If you're in the textile industry, if you're in the automotive industry, there's actually another middleman before it gets to the retailer that we refer to as a jobber. The markup varies, again, between from 15 to 50% in many cases to a jobber. But in most cases, from the wholesaler, there wouldn't even be a jobber. It would go straight to the retailer. So there's a stocking distributor there who would then call on local retailers. And the markup from the wholesaler to the retailer is about 30 to 50%. Now, typically a retailer, if the wholesaler had to buy a skid load, probably the retailers to have to buy at least a case at a time. In a case, there might be 96 pieces, there might be a dozen. But again, they're going to stock and buy this and put it in their catalog, put it on their store shelf, and make a commitment to you, and you'll support them. And again, usually a wholesaler would have maybe 50 or 60 retailers who buy from them. So again, they all have their own distribution accordingly. From the retailer to the end consumer, typically it's between 50 and 100%. Now again, the retailer who's bought a case of these now are selling one at a time to consumers, unless you're Price Club, who ends up making you buy a case. But typically the markup's between 50 and 100%. Now these are just general guidelines that I'm putting out here. Your homework here is to determine the margins that are required for your industry. And it's very important that you follow these margins, because if you're off even by 5 points, you might be outpricing yourself in many cases there. So be very aware of what margins require. If you're the importer, make sure you have enough margins to pass it on to the final retailer to make it saleable to the final customer. If you think you're going to get 50% off the wholesaler still has to pass on to the retailer at least 30 to 50%. He's going to have to sell it literally at his cost to a retailer for him to stock it. So there's no incentive for a retailer to take your product when your competitor is giving him his 30, 50%. So make sure, whatever level you are, that you have enough margins to be competitive to the next level that you're selling to. But where the money is really made is in between here. Ultimately, is to be a manufacturer, but again, that's a different ballgame. Starting out, again, you may want to look at being in the middle there. Some other considerations, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time because I'm already running out of time here, but again, being specific. This will save you a lot of time at the end. Most entrepreneurs are sort of all over the map, but if you narrow down an industry or product, at least when you write a manufacturer, you say, I'm looking for an electronic device with this type of output, it has to be this weight, this type of component, what have you there. Start with a product start with a product and a country that you know. Again, it's sort of exotic to go to some of these other countries that you don't know about, but again, this is where you get yourself into trouble. It's better to start with a country that maybe you come from or that you have contacts with that tend to be more reliable. Similar with a product that you have an interest in. Again, we get people who get into all these crazy products, but at the end you don't know enough about the product to talk intelligently. And at the end, when you talk to a buyer, they've seen pretty much everything that's out there. Start with the market versus the product. Most entrepreneurs sort of do it the other way around. What they're trying to do is create a need for a market where really there should be a market already established for a product there. So again, stay away maybe at the beginning from new and unique products where you have to create a need because no one knows about these products, where if there's already a market established, what you're trying to do is trying to fill that market with maybe a more competitive product. And then remember your channels and your margins. So make sure you understand that distribution, but more importantly that you have the margins in place to keep everybody happy there. So in the initial contact, there are typically about 4 pieces of information that you're going to have to get from the supplier. First, again, a product sample. Now, if you're selling machinery or something that costs us $50,000 or $100,000, it's probably not realistic for us to buy a sample machinery at this stage here. But what a manufacturer will do, if he knows that you're an engineer, that you're in a position to represent his product, he'll probably give you schematic diagrams. He'll give you videotapes showing you from the starting of the raw materials to the completion of the product there. And that might be enough to show your potential buyers. And if you've got a serious buyer, probably you and the manufacturer will pay for his flight to go to the plant, see the actual machinery in work or what have you there. So again, but if it's a consumer product that costs you a couple of dollars or a couple $100, try to get a real sample. There's nothing better than a real life sample that you can show to a potential buyer who will know exactly how it's going to look when it's packaged or how it's finished. Pricing information. Again, this is very important that you get the pricing information and to what point they are quoting you. First, as a general rule of thumb, outside of Canada, no one deals in Canadian dollars. In most cases, either in Deutschmarks or what have you, but US dollars is probably the common denominator for most negotiations today in Western countries. So first clarify what dollar currency that you're dealing in there. But the point of export, you've got to clarify. Now, the first one is what we call CIF. Now, these are Incoterms. They're shipping terms that are well known if you're in international trade. CFI is an acronym that stands for Cost, Insurance, and Freight. Now, this is an inclusive price where the manufacturer, quote, say you're the importer, the buyer, and you're dealing with a foreign manufacturer. When he gives you a CIF price, if it's FO, which is free out to Halifax or something, this is a cost to bring it into Canada and then to load it off of the vessel. Once it's loaded to Halifax, if that's the named port, then you must arrange with a trucker or something to pick up your goods and bring it to your warehouse or what have you there. Now that does not include paying tax and duty. All he's doing is paying the cost to bring it into port and to unload it. If it's CIF, you have to pay for the unloading charge. So there's subtle differences, but you have to understand that to unload a container, you may have to hire a crane that will cost you $300 that you didn't anticipate. And again, there goes your first commission. CNF, very similar to the first one, but it excludes insurance. So the insurance is on the buyer's account. So the manufacturer is prepared for the cost, to pay for the cost and the freight. But again, they usually give you a standard insurance policy. Now, if you're importing a very sensitive piece of hospital equipment that needs more insurance than what they're prepared to give you, this is why they'll probably say, we'll give you a CNF, you go out to Lloyd's of London or what have you, negotiate a policy that you feel is acceptable to you to safely should the product get damaged. FOB stands for free on board. So this is the cost to load it onto a vessel. Now, again, within continental North America, a lot of times you'll get a price like FOT, which is free on truck or free on rail. But when you see FOB, because the cheapest way to ship product today still is by vessel, by boat. So most of the time you see FOB as a term. So the cost here, the manufacturer is saying, I'll pay for the cost to load it onto the vessel. So there might be a 2-day storage fee to bring it to a container yard, to bring it to the shipyard. And the manufacturer is actually paying for this until it's loaded onto the vessel. So it was bumped, this shipping or what have you. He'll pay for the downtime until it's loaded. But once it crosses the rail of this vessel, the title now exchanges to you, and you're responsible for paying for the balance of the shipment or what have you there. FAS is free alongside. So what the manufacturer, when he gives you this pricing, is he'll bring it alongside this vessel. He won't pay for it to load on the vessel, but he'll just bring it alongside. Again, there's a substantial cost if this vessel, and it happens all the time, you get the shipping schedule from the boat, and then you find out there was a delay from the last shipment, and all of a sudden you have to find storage for your product or what have you there. So again, this is probably a price a manufacturer will give you if he's never been involved with export. So he's only prepared to bring it up to the port in his country, but he's not going to take any responsibility for loading or any damage to it once he loses control of the product there. X-Warehouse, again, very similar. A manufacturer will probably give you X-Warehouse if they've never been involved with export, but they're interested in entertaining export sales there. So they'll work with you, but they'll say, I'll sell you right from my warehouse. You have to arrange with your freight forwarder to load it onto a truck or onto a rail to get it onto this boat to finally bring it to your final destination there. So those last two are very common for people with manufacturers with very limited experience in international trade. The first 3 or 4, they do this on a common basis. They know what price and how far they're comfortable with to shipping the product until exchange hands for title. This one here, again, I'm going to come back to this in a minute here, but there are some people that you need to be aware of. So when you get involved with international trade, you're trying to build a team here. Again, you can't be an expert in everything. Your primary task, again, is to focus on backup suppliers or secondary suppliers. You always have a primary, and then finding more customers. That's really where 90% of your time is. The non-selling task, again, there are people out there who know this inside out better than you'll ever know. First one is a customs broker. Now, there are 2 departments or organizations that can provide you this information. Customs Excise, which their parent is Revenue Canada. So whenever you talk to any government official, there's a tariff specialist who will tell you if you're importing furniture, if it's not carpeted, or if the fabric's made in the USA, then there's no duty. Actually, I'm bringing up there's a product I'm selling on TV called the Fire Warden. It's a fire retardant blanket. So I called last week if there's any duty, because we need to know what the cost landed here in Canada is. And we found out we can import it as a towel because it's all natural fiber products there, and the product's actually made in the United States. So there's no duty or taxes if you're importing towels, even though this is technically a fire blanket. So these are things that you'll learn about in many cases. But if you call Customs Excise, they'll say, oh yeah, there's 7.3% on this blanket here. And they'll never take responsibility in many cases, but it's a number to work with. Most of the time, if you're dealing with a manufacturer, he'll know what his classification for his product actually is in many cases, and he'll tell you what classification to use it to import a product under. So it's simply, I remember a couple of years ago, I had some inquiries from China for cellular phones. And this would be under wireless telephones or something. And now they actually have a classification for cellular phones. But there was literally a 2/3 difference in the duty that you would pay. One would quote 8%, another would be like 2.3% for the same identical product. So knowing which classification you use can make all the difference in many cases. But again, there's a customs broker, which